Turning America's military into one huge social justice experiment. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. How Obama turned the military into a social justice experiment. That was one New York Post headline in September 2019. The 7 most egregious acts of social justice in Obama's military. That was a headline in iHeart.com, January 24th, 2017. And here we are under President Joe Biden, and it's more of the same. And if we don't put a stop to it, it's going to have tragic consequences for America's national security. If you like Bold and Blunt, subscribe to Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, or go to edify.app/podcasts. It is the platform for faith-based podcasts, the #1 online platform to find all your faith-based podcasts. And I'm happy to say that Bold and Blunt is among its esteemed lineup. You can also get Bold and Blunt, of course, at WashingtonTimes.com. You can subscribe to Bold and Blunt there by going to the bottom of the page, click on the newsletter section, find my name, and sign up for my 3 times a week Washington Times newsletter delivered straight to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in time for lunch hour. You don't even have to leave your work desk. And you can read all the latest conservative news, conservative commentary that I write all day long at the Washington Times. Plus, listen to my Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. And where else can you find Bold and Blunt podcasts like at Bold and Blunt? How Social Justice is Killing the Military, March 5th, 2022. So we got social justice under Barack Obama in the military. We had a little reprieve from social justice in the military under the great President Donald Trump. And here we are going back in time to more social justice in America's national defense system. Let me read from this American Thinker article from March 2022. Some 41% of the military identify as members of minority groups. That's according to the Department of Defense in a study, in a report from February 2021. Now, when you compare that to the U.S. population at large, 24% at that time of the DoD study identified as members of minority groups. So what that means is the military is heavy on minority presence. And anecdotally speaking, I was a member of the U.S. Army. I was active Army, and I can tell you there were more minorities in the Army, in the service, in all the places I went in the Army than I ever saw in my community growing up in Massachusetts, land of the liberals, that land of embracing diversity, right? Anyhow, back to this report. The least racist people in America are in our military. These writers for American Thinker write. Of course they are. Let me quote again. It is obvious to all who have served because one's identity or race is irrelevant when people are trying to kill you and your teammates. No one cares about race when bullets are whizzing past your head. So here goes the big question. Why has President Biden declared white supremacy as America's #1 threat? That's a good question. What's the answer? Let's go on. Why has the Secretary of Defense created a counter-extremism working group to uncover extremism in the ranks? There's another good question. Waiting for the answer. Back to American Thinker. The actual record of racial/radical incidents is not the reason. Why? Because the number of cases, actual cases, is tiny, teeny tiny. Look at the facts. Look at the numbers. Look at that F word the liberals hate, facts. With 3 million in uniform, American Thinker writes, DOD reports less than 100 annual incidents of extremism. Now, they don't define extremism, but if the DOD is trying to push a social justice agenda, wouldn't it make sense that the DOD would dredge up and dig up and uncover as many cases of so-called extremism as possible, meaning giving that word the broadest of definitions? And even with that in mind, all they could find were 100 annual incidents out of 3.1 million in U.S. military uniform. That's not just tiny. That's minuscule. I mean, that's a blip. That's nothing. And yet, listen to this headline from a press release from Senator Roger Wicker's office, Republican, Mississippi, February 15th, 2022. Military has spent 6 million man-hours on quote-unquote woke training under Biden, senators find. Senate inquiry joined by Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker raises readiness concerns. Of course we have readiness concerns. If all our military members are sitting in classrooms being taught about the radicalism of Christianity or the radicalism of military members who don't want to take the vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, or they're being taught about the radicalism of singing patriotic songs, then they're not in the field training. They're not in the field training for their actual mission, which is ding dong, ding, to defend America from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Right? That's what you join the military to do, to uphold the Constitution, to fight for American citizens, to fight for your country, not to be told that you're not being tolerant enough of the LGBTQ movement. So let's look at this press release. Roger Wicker, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, joined Senator Jim Inhofe, Republican, Oklahoma, and 10 other Republican members of the committee. Where are the Democrats on that? Interesting. In releasing data from the Department of Defense outlining military costs and time spent on key elements of Joe Biden's progressive social agenda. I would call it a socialist / communist / cultural Marxist social agenda. But aside from that, let's read on. According to General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, U.S. service members have spent a total of 5,889,082 man-hours on the February 5th, 2021 extremism stand down and on diversity, equity, and inclusion training, including critical race theory, since Joe Biden took office. And you know why? Because when Joe Biden took office, one of his first actions was to issue this executive order that I'm about to read the title of. It was signed January 20th, 2021. Presidential Action, Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government. And in it came all these lovely phrases like equal opportunity being the bedrock of American democracy, and by advancing equity across the federal government, yada yada. For the purposes of this order, the term equity means the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, yada yada yada. That's where this garbage is coming from. General Milley, back to this February 2022 press release, provided the data in response to a letter from senators requesting details about the costs and readiness effects of the administration's progressive social agenda. Again, I'm going to call it socialist, communist, cultural Marxism. Wicker and Inhofe joined with several others. I'm not going to list them all, but we've got in there Senator Rick Scott of Florida, Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, and bunches more. The senators said in this letter, "We face real threats across the world, yet the Biden administration is more focused on promoting its leftist social agenda in the military instead of countering China, Russia, and Iran, or creating an effective counterterrorism plan." Well, no wonder North Korea is over there setting off ICBMs, right? No wonder China is running roughshod over America's economy and culture. No wonder Russia is laughing at us, and key players in the United Nations or World Economic Forum or World Health Organization care little about what America says, because, as a matter of fact, if Joe Biden is spokesperson for America, he's not saying that much. He can't form a coherent sentence. So no wonder nobody's listening to him. And instead, our military, our fine military, our gem of the world military, our envy of allies and hostiles alike military, are spending so much training time on social justice issues that these senators on Capitol Hill, Republican senators, meaning the smart senators who care more about America and American citizens than they do about advancing their own personal agendas, are worried that they're not so ready for military functions, military missions. It's crazy. The administration's Countering Extremism Working Group's 21-page report on extremism in the military came out, finding fewer than 100 members of the military engaged in quote unquote extremist activity. The senators write, "For every documented case of extremism in the military, our military spent a whopping 58,000 hours. 58,000 hours in training on extremism." Of course, then they throw in this necessary caveat, because if they don't, the Democrats will jump on their statement, on their rhetoric, and say that the senators are actually supporting extremism. So they issue this statement: "Well, any case of extremist behavior is wrong and harmful to military readiness. Previous defense authorization bills have already given our military the appropriate tools to address these concerns." See, if the Republican senators didn't make that statement, that obvious statement, "Well, any case of extremist behavior is wrong and harmful," Democrats would have turned around and said, "Oh, these Republicans, they're advancing an extremist agenda. They support extremism." That's what Democrats do. Look, Department of Defense, U.S. military, they're there to protect America from enemies. They're there to protect American citizens from attacks, from foreign threats, from perils that come in the form of military operations against our nation. They're not there to learn about transgenderism. And if we don't start insisting our military be used for what it's properly supposed to be used for, national defense, if we don't stop using our military for social justice experiments and stop driving out the best our military has to offer by mandating stupid, dangerous, untested vaccinations for a coronavirus with a 99% recovery rate anyhow, if we don't stop abusing those who sacrifice most to defend this country, we're going to have a military that's filled with a bunch of wusses. I would use a different word. I would use a word that was slung about with frequency when I was growing up. Even adults used to sling it about. But nowadays I'm told that you can't use that word, so I'll use a word that rhymes with it. We're going to have a military filled with wussies, with little crybaby wussies who don't want to go on their 12-mile march or don't want to do their 2-mile run because their toes hurt or they have a blister. And instead of being told that they have to do the march or run, they get coddled and sent back to their rooms for a little R&R. And meanwhile, the real men and women of the military are driven out because they don't want to be around a whole bunch of wussies. We're going to have a wussified military, and not only is the world going to know that we have a wussy in the White House who has some serious mental issues, the world's going to know that the military he commands is filled with like-minded wussies. So I have a guest today who is actually fighting the wussification of our U.S. military. He's actually fighting the infiltration of social justice loons into our U.S. military. His name is Rod Bishop. He is retired Lieutenant General with the United States Air Force, and he now serves as the president of Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services, and that is in the military services. Thank you, Rod, for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Cheryl, thank you so much for helping us get the word out. This is a national security issue that all of America needs to know about.
I agree. Let's talk about your role as president of Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services Incorporated. Stand. What is this initiative? What is this campaign all about?
Well, the campaign is really about educating members of Congress, fellow military members and vets, and really all of America on just how, I'd like to use the word insidious, but some of it's pretty overt, how this indoctrination of Marxist ideals is happening across our entire military, weakening our military from within, striking a knife right into what should be the heart of military operations, and that's cohesiveness among its members. So from critical race theory to just radical policies, ladies and gentlemen, that's what's happening across our military.
Now,
and so STAR's mission is really to educate people, and hopefully by shining some sunlight on all of this, more people will wake up, and just like the parents of Loudoun County and the parents across Virginia said, wait a minute, we don't want this happening. In Loudoun County and in Virginia, for example, a parent stood up and took issue with this indoctrination happening K through 12. I mean, the young, impressionable minds of our future. What worse place could we want this division to happen in our military that's chartered with the defense of our country?
Let's talk about some of the specifics that you have found in the military, because you say it's not even that subtle anymore, that it's really out in the open. What are some egregious examples of the radicalization of America's military that you have encountered?
Well, since most of the core members of STAR, Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services, live right outside the Air Force Academy, our initial examples came right from the cadets and what they were experiencing. When you have cadets tell you that the culture is changing underneath my feet, or the United States Air Force Academy is the worst place in the world to be as a white male Christian, your eyes and ears kind of perk up, especially when you're a graduate of an institution that so many of us used to be proud of. So in specific examples, the first one that really I guess, shall we say, formed a core of our organization was a Black Lives Matter video put out by coaches where they came close to shouting Black Lives Matter in an angry tone 7 times in a 3-minute video. And the video was full of lies, just things that don't exist anymore. We were successful in getting that video down, but it took 9 months. So that in and of and by itself shows you just how deeply rooted it is. The second example we saw at the Academy was an article that was published saying the Academy stands up a diversity including reading room. Okay, diversity, inclusion, nice words. What's in that reading room at the library? Sent some cadets over, and what we got was Marxist books about Black Lives Matter, books about Black Panthers. Nothing really inspirational from Martin Luther King. So we weighed in on that one and got some more conservative-leaning literature in there, like books from Shelby Steele, Bob Whitson, materials along those lines. The next example we saw was an extremist down day. I mean, that was across the entire department. And in that guidance that Department of Defense put out, there were 4 videos that they were supposed to show to the entire military. And every single one of those videos was of white extremism from 2019, as if the summer of Antifa and Black Lives Matter and military members supporting those organizations in 2020 just didn't exist.
Wow.
The next book, the next example, which is particularly egregious to me, because I was the former deputy commander at U.S. Southern Command, and I spent 3 years of my life trying to find ways to secure our southern border, was a book chosen and issued to every freshman cadet last year, written by George Takei. I didn't know who the guy was until my wife said, well, he's Mr. Zulu. Take a look at his Twitter feed. I mean, it's just so over-the-top political, and if you read the book, it's a cartoon book, just made for indoctrination. And the last several pages, almost chapter, just essentially advocate strongly for open borders and strongly tell lies. I mean, Trump's border cages, Trump's Muslim ban, I mean, those are just continuations of Trump's political opponents and the words that they used. I can go on and on. George Takei, the guy was invited back as a guest speaker for the premier event at the Air Force Academy National Character and Leadership Symposium, was the only speaker to have a venue, to give his presentation in a venue which would hold the entire cadet wing, all 4,000 plus, and it was made mandatory. Even though for 8 months we had pleaded with the Air Force Academy to please become apolitical. Don't hook your wagon to this horse. I mean, he's so over the top left-leaning. We want a military that's apolitical, and I would hope everybody agrees. And those are some examples between us and members of Congress who opened up a database and collected examples around our country. We have over 600 examples that we could share. So it's pretty clear that this type of ideology is dividing, not unifying our military.
There's been a larger movement around the nation that I want you to address how it's impacting the military. And that is, in the last couple of years of the coronavirus crackdowns on liberties in America, the left in particular has been trying very hard to equate taking vaccines and wearing face masks with patriotism, saying that that is your patriotic duty as a citizen. How much of that type of leftist agenda has infiltrated in your opinion or experience or knowledge or awareness into the Air Force, into the military? And what kind of damage does that do?
Cheryl, it is huge. It is huge. What you just said, I could not agree with more. Although I must be honest and say it was a spirited debate over 2 different staff meetings over 2 weeks as to whether or not STARS wanted to take on the vaccine issue, because most of us are retired military, and myself was blessed with 7 commands, and, we were always first in line to get the shots.
Right.
But in this particular case, there's a difference. It's an example of the totalitarian government, authoritarian government that we are becoming. I mean, when you look at the vaccine, the first element of any type of medicine should be do no harm. Senator Johnson, I think, shined a light on that in a panel he had back in January that's raised a lot of questions about the DMEDS database. Are we really doing no harm? Or is the vaccine the cause of many harmful side effects, as the database and VIRS, the national database even show?
Right.
It ignores natural immunity. And we've seen, Dr. Fauci from old movies, I think most of your audience probably has seen those, for him saying natural immunity is the best vaccine you can have. You're supposed to have informed consent when you're given a shot or a vaccine that's under emergency use authorized only. And as far as we know, at least federal courts have found that Comirnaty is the only approved vaccine, and none of that exists in the United States. So all of us who have been vaccinated in our country are, taking an experimental drug. And it's pretty clear. I mean, I don't know about you, but I know of 8 people that have had COVID since December, and every single one of them was vaccinated. So the disease has moved on to the variants that are present now. But yet our government is continue to mandate people go get the vaccine or else. Just 2 weeks ago, cadets at the Academy, Air Force Academy, returned from spring break and were given a letter, those who hadn't been vaccinated yet, to either start a vaccine regimen, get a shot, take the shots, resign, or face disciplinary action, and you have 5 days to make that decision. So, to me, we're losing common sense, we're losing logic, and it's one of the things that we hear from military members, not just cadets, that upsets them the most. They've lost faith in their leadership. The leadership isn't pushing back and asking the questions that, we just kind of went over. It's a tremendous waste of dollars to us as taxpayers. Look at all the training dollars that we've spent, and how many thousands of people either A, got out of the military because they didn't like this coercion, or B, have now hundreds across all the services have been forced out. Some have been court-martialed. It just doesn't make sense. So it's unfortunately just another example of this Marxist ideological march into our institutions.
And just to lead into probably the last question we'll have time for is, to me, the bigger concern is the changing definition of patriotism, because it strikes as what I think it was under Barack Obama when the military was under attack and they started investigating so-called radicalism defined as Christians. Do you recall that? And I wonder if you can address the point now of how it is to be a Christian in the military. Are you still targeted as being radical?
I think we'd find that to vary across the different commands and even the different commands in commands. I mean, commanders have a lot of power. I don't know if you've had Matt Lohmeyer on your show or not, but
yes, I have.
Former Space Force Lieutenant Colonel, was #1 out of 784 majors in the U.S. Space Force at one point. And he saw this indoctrination happening at his base that he was stationed at in Colorado, and did everything by the book, went up the chain of command. Nobody took any action. And even after President Trump in September of 2020 issued some 2 executive orders outlawing critical race theory teaching, it still continued to happen at his base. And so we filed an IG complaint, and the IG complaint came back just like our IG complaint did on the Black Lives Matter video, and said, your case is dismissed, period. That was it, no explanation. And so we wrote a book, and that was happening at that base at other bases across the Air Force and across the other services. A lot depends on the commander. So I think it would be unfair to make the generalization that you're making in terms of an anti-Christian attitude. But one thing is pretty clear, is as best as we can trace back the roots of all of this happening, President Obama did kind of incorporate it into the fabric, shall we say, of the military when he issued his executive order in 2011, establishing diversity and inclusion offices and officers throughout the Department of Defense. The history actually goes back a little bit beyond that, though, to a military commission that was created in the late 2008, I think it was. But that's a little bit of the history that apparently we don't have time to go into.
Well, I just want to wrap up by giving you an opportunity to explain how people can join the fight, because you do have a link on your STARS website, Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services. It's at starrs.us, and you have a link called Join the Fight, Volunteers Needed. Just wrap up by explaining how people could volunteer to help.
Well, thanks so much for that opportunity and that plug, Cheryl. Yes, I would say please come join us. Just sign up. It doesn't cost anything. Right now, we're probably by the end of today, if you'd like to help out cadets and midshipmen, we're mounting a campaign to help pay for the legal fees. There's still, although if you talk to cadets and midshipmen, you will find that many of them said, I just took the vaccine, I didn't want to. But, you know, it was the road that wasn't so full of obstacles. Well, there are still a number of cadets and midshipmen who are resisting the vaccine and are facing expulsion from the academy and maybe other disciplinary action. And so we're trying to help them by taking the issues to court, just like the Navy SEALs did. So please feel free to come by. Just join us and get our newsletter and stay abreast of what's happening. Our newsletter is widely acclaimed. You'll see it once a month. It gives a summary of a lot of the things that are happening. If you can volunteer your time, we'd love that too, because we're growing. We'd eventually like to have little, shall we say, committees or pockets in every single state that are highlighting things that are happening in that particular state.
Excellent.
So it's a great effort. We don't want our military to go down a Marxist road. Come join us and help us out.
Yeah, you guys are growing because Americans realize the importance of a strong, unified U.S. military. So, Rod Bishop, I want to thank you for the work you do for America. Thank you for your service in the military, and thank you for being on Bold and Blunt.
Well, thank you again, Cheryl, for helping us spread the word. We need it.
Social justice in the military. What a dangerous game the Democrats are playing. What a dangerous game that they have been playing for years. It's disgusting to me that when it comes to something as basic as national defense and the U.S. military, that Democrats can't even rally behind a single cause of defense of American citizens. They have to politicize everything. And not just politicize everything. They have to make everything as complicated and as dirty and as disgusting and as secular and as anti-godly as possible. It's just, the Democrat Party of today it just disgusts me. Anyhow, I want to thank you for listening. And if you like Bold and Blunt, go to edify.app/podcast. Find it there among all the great podcasts that are among Edify's lineup, and subscribe. Not just to Bold and Blunt. Pick out a couple others, 2, 3. Subscribe to them all. I mean, seriously, the more you see the damage the Democrats do, the more you need your faith bolstered. You can also get Bold and Blunt, of course, at WashingtonTimes.com or wherever fine podcasts are offered. And don't forget to check out my forthcoming book. My forthcoming fourth book. It's called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Trust me, The left is not going to let this coronavirus go quietly into that good night. They have a lot more exploiting to do of this COVID-19. Mark these words. Pick up a copy of Lockdown and see all the eye-opening research that I found about what the left has been doing, using the coronavirus as cause to clamp freedoms, and more than that, what they will be doing in the coming days, weeks, months, and even years, if Americans let them. So it all starts with educating yourself. If you can see the field, then you can fight effectively on the field. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.